What time is it? Let me check my watch. Oh, it's bone o'clock. In olden days, a glimpse of femur was only for morbid dreamers, but you're not alone. Bring anything bones. Two goofy gals with deathly interest go on a skeleton inquest in your headphones. Anything bones.
Hello and welcome to Anything Bones. I'm Sophie Schwartz.
And I'm Katelyn Hart, and we're ready to talk to you today.
Yes, we're coming to you live from a weird Tuesday night recording.
Yeah, I'm here to sell you life insurance.
No, do not buy Katelyn's life insurance. It is a trap.
What if that was the scam all along? Like we had just started this podcast so I could get an in with my life insurance scam.
We're taking quite a long walk to it. And we have many times on this podcast said that we are anti-life insurance almost.
Oh, shit. Yeah.
Because
what a hypocrite. Shit. I'm so sorry.
The murders that happen.
Yeah.
You know
okay,
better.
Scratch it all. I'm just kidding. I don't sell life insurance.
Yet. But, just for a couple of easy payments, $69.69, you can be the proud owner of Katelyn Hart's fantastical life insurance.
Patent pending.
Yeah, not redeemable by murderous spouses.
What are we doing?
I don't know
already.
And it's
can
just
get us
back
today. Yeah. So we have nobody to rein us in. Sorry.
No crutches today for these broken bones.
That's good.
Okay. I thought that we would start off this episode with some fun facts about the skull.
Okay. All right. I'm here for it.
I Googled fun facts about the skull.
On the nose?
Just for fun. And some of these facts are fun and some of them are terribly boring.
Okay.
A fun fact is there are 22 bones in the skull. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I thought, yeah, okay.
A very boring one is that the skull is not only made of bones, but also has cartilage and ligaments.
Oh yeah, of course. Your nose is not bone.
No, your nose is, remember, cervix. It's
cut that out. So no, you don't have to cut that out. I'll explain it because it is kind of funny. Apparently, on the internet, it told us that if you press in between, if you feel the bridge of your nose, is this the bridge of my nose? No. Sorry. Scratch that. If you feel the very tippy of your nose, that's apparently what your cervix feels like.
Ugh, terrible.
And that's just something that I didn't need to know, but can't forget now.
Yeah, I always think of that actually when I touch the tip of my nose, because we used to go up to each other and poke each other in the nose and go, cervix.
Oh, that was a different time when we touched each other's faces constantly.
Oh, yeah. Also, it takes an average force of 785 pounds to crush a human skull.
Good. I'm glad it's durable.
Very durable. But the reason that we're talking about skulls is because we really want to talk about what goes inside the skull. We're talking
Cranium. I'm just kidding. The brain.
The brain. Your Tuesday energy is out of here.
Sorry.
I love it. It makes this recording extra spicy.
Yeah. Some things may be too hot to release to the public.
We are talking about the brain. We're going to talk about some psychological topics that relate to bones because Katelyn's really interested in psychology and so am I. And it turns out that there are some topics where your brain and your bones intersect.
Well, I should hope that your brain and your bones intersect in some capacity, but you're right. Today we're talking about, well, I don't know. I don't really want to totally give away what I'm talking about at the top, because I think you're going first, right?
I can set this thing right off.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I had to close the tab of fun skull facts. All right. Katelyn, I want to talk to you about the glass delusion.
Okay. Yep.
So the glass delusion was a kind of psychological phenomenon, or like a external manifestation of a psychiatric disorder that basically happened in Europe between the 15th and 17th century, where mostly nobles thought that bones or parts of their body were made of glass.
That is so interesting. Is it like the word that came to mind, or the words, was like mass hysteria, but it sounds like it wasn't mass. There was nothing big about it. It was like a small subset of the population.
No, it was on a person-to-person basis. And I'll give you we'll talk about a couple of cases of this. I'm just going to rattle off my sources really quickly. And buckle in, folks. This is going to be a long one. psychologytoday.com, history.com, bbcnews.com, Wikipedia for the first time, ancient origins, howstuffworks.com, Wikipedia the second time, fascinate.com, and dailyjstore.org.
Okay.
So I went all over the internet for this one. So, like I said, it was prevalent in Europe between the 15th to the 17th century. There have been a lot of tales of people who thought that they had glass bones, glass heads, glass arms, glass hearts, and these people feared that they would shatter themselves. And
right.
There was a common fear of shattered buttocks.
Oh God.
We'll talk about that a little bit later. But people who believed that their butts were made of glass and wouldn't sit down.
Oh.
Which is like, can you imagine how miserable that must have been?
So you're only standing, or you're only lying down? Like, there's no in between?
You have to find a way, because if you truly believe that your butt would break, like, you would take a lot of caution.
That's really scary. I can imagine that would lead to a lot of paranoia and a lot of like comorbidities.
Oh yeah, definitely. And just like to quickly define a delusion, because I was trying to think, like, can I define it off the top of my head? No, because I do not have any sort of psychology background academically.
Well, no, I mean, I wouldn't say, I think an undergraduate degree in psychology, you're just like brushing the surface of all of this stuff. So I wouldn't say I think I have a better than average understanding, but only a little bit, honestly.
But I decided to look it up just to have the most knowledge about it. So our friend Wikipedia says a delusion is a belief that is clearly false and that indicates an abnormality in the afflicted person's content of thought. A person with a delusion will hold firmly to the belief regardless of evidence to the contrary. And I feel like this will play a big part in understanding this delusion, because in a lot of these stories, people attempt to disprove that the person is made of glass, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you know, that's the power of this. That's the power of the human mind.
That's the amazing thing, is just how your brain can trick you into thinking something like that.
And
it can happen anytime, I bet.
Well, we'll talk about why it happened at this time to these types of people.
Okay. Let's get into it.
Let's dig these bones up. So one of the first recorded patients of this glass delusion, and is also probably the one people think of the most if they know anything about this, is King Charles VI, who was alive between 1368 and 1422. Charles ascended the throne in 1380 when he was 11 years old.
Oof.
Yeah, woof to your childhood. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
He didn't really begin to like rule per se until like 1388, because like up until then he had his uncles who were kind of acting as his like regents and like people who, you know, ruled for
advised the baby.
Yes, advised the baby king. This bitchy little baby king. So when he eventually was old enough to start ruling, he had a great reputation at first. People were like, this is what we like about him. He's hot. He's just. He is very charismatic. He's like enacting some reforms to take out like corrupt people in the government. So people really, and he has like a lot of enlightened advisors. And so like people are like, we're gonna call him Charles the Beloved because we beloved him.
Sure.
Because he's got a great reputation. But he was under a lot of stress for a bunch of different reasons. But one of the big ones was that he had a huge Pope problem.
What?
He had a Pope problem. A too many popes problem.
What?
I love this. So at the time, there are two popes. There's one pope in Rome and then another pope in, I think it's Avignon, France.
I think so, yeah.
So there were two popes and they disliked each other and they were trying to figure out who was the pope and who was the anti-pope. The not pope.
Who comes in second place for the pope?
Who is the real pope and who is the dollar store Safeway Select pope?
Mm-hmm.
Charles approached the Pope who was living in France and was like, hey, let's try to get you to be Pope in Rome because I think you're the real Pope. I choose you, Pope, French Pope. Pope, French Pope. That was his name. But before he could really like go through with that plan, he started having big problems with his mental health in 1392.
Oof.
Yeah. He suffered his first psychotic break, and people believe that this was maybe a first episode of schizophrenia, which was possibly what he had, and it led to him having violent episodes. I'm laughing because it's so bad. But in that same year, 1392, he had one of these fits of rage and paranoia, like you were talking about earlier, and he killed 4 of his own knights. Like when they were like out riding, he was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah, shit.
So now he's kind of earning a different nickname and a different reputation. Now he's kind of known as Charles the Mad. And he now began to believe that his body was entirely made of glass.
Oh, the whole thing.
Yeah,
the whole thing.
Whole body.
Shit.
Yeah, and he would keep himself from shattering by like remaining motionless for hours or wrapping himself in like big fluffy blankets. And he made himself special reinforced garments to protect his glass body.
Huh.
I mean, he's the king. So like everyone has to like, the king comes to you and goes, I am made of glass. Will you please make me a reinforced shirt?
Everyone's just like, yeah, what size do you want it in? How quickly can I get that for you?
But, he was up to all sorts of things kind of during this time. For a time, he believed he was St. George, and he would run around the castle and the gardens in the nude.
Oops.
Yeah, oops, indeed. His kingly Beppis was out. So there was no kind of scientific explanation for what was happening to him at the time. They had a very, very small understanding of like brain. Even brain think was up for debate, where your soul lived in your body, in your brain. I think we've talked about this a little bit, but some of the clergymen thought that his illness might have been caused by him having the wrong choice of pope or from having too much sex.
Wait. Hold it right there. They thought that having two popes, like the stress of having two popes, caused this problem?
No, they think
that
God was punishing him for choosing the wrong pope.
I see. I was like, what? Okay, I get it now. Or it's either that or he's had too much sex and this is punishment for the sex, or like what?
I mean, from what I was reading, it's kind of both. They're like, you chose the wrong pope and you're doing it too much, because he had a mistress and a wife. So he was doing
whatever. They were just grasping at straws. They don't know. They did not know. They made it up. I'll tell you right now, they made it up.
Well, I'll tell you how they tried to solve it in probably the most logical way ever. Like, honestly, if I'm going to solve this problem of choosing the wrong pope and having too much sex, this is obviously what I would do, which is to make one of Charles's daughters a nun. That would solve it, right? You make his daughter a nun and that resolves all of his sins, right?
Oh, God. What? No.
That's not how it works. I don't think so, at least. They also tried to cure him by drilling small holes in his skull. We know this is called trepanation. It doesn't work. They also tried to exorcise him, and that did not work. Ultimately, he died a disturbed man, unfortunately. But it's interesting because other nobles start to have this affliction kind of throughout the centuries. So the next person that kind of pops up with this, there's this story that goes around of like an unnamed noble who believed that he was not a person, but a glass vase. Apparently this royal spent a lot of his time laying on a bed of straw to protect himself. And his physician apparently was so fed up with this whole thing that he lit the man's bed on fire and then locked the room. So this is how they're dealing with a mental illness. They're like, oh, we'll light his bed on fire and we'll lock him in the room and he'll realize that he's not going to melt and that he's made of flesh, and that will cure him.
What the fuck? If you even do just a cursory look at the history of the treatment of the mentally ill, it's horrible. It's hideous. Like, you can't even get too far into it before you feel sick. It's just mistreatment after mistreatment and misdiagnosing and just experimenting on people, basically. Sorry, it's your story. I'm stepping off my soapbox. Goodbye.
No, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, basically, as Caitlin said, there were like varying degrees of like shitty shit that people did to people who were afflicted with this, but most of the time it was noble people, so they wouldn't get away with too much. I do like this story. So there was a nobleman who thought that his butt was made of glass. As we discussed earlier, this was a different guy than the guy that we were just talking about who thought he was a vase.
Right.
This guy, he wouldn't sit down anywhere without like a real big cushion, and he was constantly afraid that his butt would shatter. And so his physician basically gave him a good spanking on the bottom and was like, do you feel the pain? The pain is your flesh. And the guy was like, oh, cool.
And then he was cured.
I guess. Question mark.
Who knows? Who knows?
There was another man. They're called glass men sometimes, which I feel is glass people, let's say.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
So one of these glass people, let's not call one of these people suffering from this delusion. Let's not define them by their mental illness. But this guy did travel to Murano, which is a glass blowing like mecca, basically. Like it's one of the places known for glass blowing, and he was trying to throw himself into a kiln so that he could be transformed into a goblet.
No. Did they stop him?
I assume so.
Okay, good.
So how does this work? What is this all about? How did people define it in this time? Apparently, according to medical understanding of the day, this glass delusion was a form of melancholia, which is defined as a disease particularly common to scholars and lovers. And I wrote, Jesus. So watch out, Katoon.
Oh God. Melancholia, I feel like it's just like a catch-all. It's like, no, we don't know what's wrong with you. It's melancholia.
Yeah. And this is all, of course, based off of the medieval understanding of like health, which is all filtered through the four humors system of medicine.
Right.
Which, just a refresher for everyone, is that like health is achieved through the balancing of your four humors, which are blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. This is all bullshit. The only one that's real is fucking blood. I mean, bile is real, but not in the way that they think. And so is phlegm, but it's all kind of bullshit. But so melancholy dates back to Galen and Hippocrates, and people have been writing about like what is basically, depression, melancholy for, millennia. And it's said to be caused by an imbalance of black bile, which was great for me to hear because I've been known to be melancholic at times. If I could just get that black bile in check, maybe that would help.
Maybe. My neighbors are like going apeshit right now. I can hear them through the walls, and the mic is definitely picking it up.
That's fine. So melancholics, or people suffering from melancholy, frequently experience paranoia, believe that they are in imminent danger, and keep people at a distance, is one of the like old-fashioned definitions of it, which I feel like fits really well into this conception of the glass delusion, because I think a lot of the time it's about keeping people away from you or feeling like your body is in imminent danger at all times.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said before, it was known to affect wealthy and educated men, mostly, who were artists or poets, or, they believed that if you thought too much, it made you very sad, basically.
Of course. Yeah. Having too many smarts made you sad, of course. What? You should be dumb and happy. God, I hate people.
Yeah. The glass delusion was rooted in melancholy, and more specifically in single-minded devotion to intellectual pursuits.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think too much and you do too much intellectual stuff, you might find yourself thinking you're made of glass. It's also interesting to note that these are noble people who might consider themselves very fragile, or consider their position in the world very fragile, because, as we know, in Europe at that time, it was easy to get your head chopped off and your whole kingdom taken away if you fucked up. Just something really interesting about why glass, because that's an interesting thing to think about. Why would people think that they're made of glass? Why that material? So in the 16th and 17th centuries, glass was very prized because the art of making clear, colorless glass was very new. And so Europeans went fucking buck wild for it. People viewed it as almost magical, and they imbued it with kind of alchemical kind of power. They thought that because it used to be sand and now it's this other precious thing, that it had that magical property of transformation.
Sure.
It was also very expensive and coveted. So having glass around was a symbol of power. Having big clear windows was a symbol of power, and people were very fascinated by it. Another part of this is also that a lot of popular literature at the time compared the human body to glass. or other like fragile vessels, which is interesting.
Okay. Why?
I don't know.
I don't get it. Weird.
I was reading about that, and there's a lot of like biblical and ancient like literature that have examples of people being made of glass or like breakable material, which is like kind of supposed to be a metaphor for like the fragility and mortality of like the condition of like being a person, you know, being human.
Sure.
Sufferers of the glass delusion may have been very aware of their fragility, both like in their body and in their like station in society. Like we were talking about with the king who was very stressed about his pope problem, and all of these nobles, their tentative situation in society, I feel like may have influenced their brains. Because kind of I was looking into delusions, and usually like what your delusion is connected to either something that's happening with you personally or something that's happening in the world or in history. So like having glass be such a new and influential material was probably a huge factor in glass being the thing that people believed that they were. During the 19th century, though, cases of the glass delusion pretty much disappeared. But during the Industrial Revolution, there were a few cases of people who had a concrete delusion.
So, sorry, people had a delusion that they were made of concrete. Is that what you mean? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. People had delusions that their bodies were made of concrete.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, kind of the exact opposite.
Yeah.
You're like indestructible in a way. Interesting.
Yeah. So again, we're talking about a new material or something that is changing society in a big way, the way glass did, the way concrete did. This kind of shows that delusions can change with the times, and that something that's prevalent in society can play a part on people's like mental illness.
Yeah.
Because one of the most common delusions that we have today, or the people have today, has to do with surveillance and technology. There was a study in 2011 that was published in the International Journal of Social Psychiatry that found that since 1950, the most common delusion was in the form of people having the belief that they were being spied on.
Yeah.
So,
and that's kind of happening with
it
technology. Like, I mean, yeah. I mean, I have an iPhone and I know it's listening. People have Alexa, it's always listening.
Yeah, but I just find it's interesting kind of drawing that line between glass, concrete, and like technology. These things that do improve our lives, but can also be seen as scary. But so that's my topic, the glass men of early modern Europe.
Glass people,
excuse me.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, moving along to our next delusion. We're both doing them because this one, I really hadn't heard about this one too much until I started digging into it, but I'm going to be talking about Cotard syndrome, or it's also called Cotard's delusion, and it's also called walking corpse syndrome. So I had a few sources for this today that I will present to you. A couple of journals. One is the Journal of Neurosciences and Rural Practice, and it's called Cotard Syndrome, 2 Case Reports and a Brief Review of Literature by Sandeep Grover, Jitender Aneja, and Senhidya Varma. I hope I'm saying that right. And the other one is from a journal called Psychiatry, Edgemont. Ooh.
So edgy.
It's called edgy Edgemont, a case report of Cotard syndrome by Anne Bruminjo, MD, and Boris Mckenlove, MD. I butchered all those names. I'm so sorry. I also used Wikipedia, of course, medicinenet.com, which is like kind of WebMD. but not. I don't know. It had a lot of
Medicinenet.com.
Now that I read it out loud, I'm like, is this a legit source? But it was helpful. I don't like WebMD. WebMD, like, I can't go on WebMD, honestly. Like, I learned that early on in my own anxiety. I just can't go on WebMD.
No, it's a hell trap.
Yeah. And my last source was a video from our favorite mortician on YouTube, Caitlin Doty. She did a video about it, and I'm going to link, of course, we always link to all of our sources on our website, which is anythingbonespodcast.squarespace.com.
Yeah.
Okay. Cotard syndrome. Cotard is spelled Cotard. So this was kind of started in 1880 by a neurologist named Jules Cotard. He called it le délire de négation.
How fancy.
Which is, let me translate, the delirium of negation. So he first studied somebody who he called Mademoiselle X, which I just love. She denied the existence of parts of her body, and she also denied her need to eat to feed herself. Quote, she said that she was condemned to eternal damnation and therefore could not die a natural death. This is in 1880, right? So this is the very beginning of learning about Cotard syndrome, and they think that they are dead or a part of them is dead. Because they're dead, they don't need to eat. They're not alive. They don't need to do anything. They don't need to see anybody because they're dead. One of the main symptoms is nihilism, also meaning that a person thinks that nothing has any meaning.
I mean, but why would you if you truly believe that you were dead?
Why would anything matter? So Mademoiselle X, over the course of being studied, Mademoiselle X actually dies of starvation, which is horrible.
Oh.
Anyway, so this is all started by Jules Cotard. So Cotard syndrome is, quote, a neuropsychiatric condition in which people develop false beliefs that their body parts are missing, or they are dying, or they don't exist. This condition is rare because only 200 known cases are present worldwide. So I honestly just want to start this off by saying that this is super rare. This syndrome is not in the DSM, which is, if you know psychology, it's a big deal. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's kind of like the Bible of abnormal psychology, basically. So Cotard syndrome's not in there. So I want to start by saying that. It's also not recognized in the International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems of the World Health Organization, which is abbreviated to ICD-10, which I know what ICD-10 codes are because I work in the medical field. And when you go to the doctor, you get, a diagnosis of what you're having. So where I work, it's usually the diagnosis of cataracts. And that code, that diagnosis code, or the ICD-10 code, is what's inputted into the computer so that everything's coded properly and your insurance gets billed properly, things like that. So this tells me a doctor can't diagnose you with Cotard syndrome.
Oh, wow.
In the system. That's fine. It's rare. So I'm going to kind of talk you through what Cotard syndrome is. And then I'm just going to look at some case studies, basically.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. Okay. So main symptoms are, quote, negation of the mind, brain, and intellect, denial of pregnancy, which I thought was interesting. I bet that one's even more rare.
Whoa.
Denial of the existence of various body parts, denial of being alive, denial of self-movement, self-starvation, less sociable, and nihilism. This typically can exist in people with depression, schizophrenia, or other illnesses associated with memory loss, like dementia also. Oh. It could also possibly be linked to encephalopathy, which is a condition where a virus or a toxin affects your brain. Multiple sclerosis could be involved. Parkinson's could be involved. Having a stroke. Subdural bleeding, which is bleeding. I can't talk. Subdural bleeding, which is bleeding outside the brain, epilepsy or migraines possibly, but I don't think just having a migraine is going to be a precursor to having Cotard syndrome. Anyway, it also, in my very brief look around these case studies, it seemed like a lot of these people started experiencing this after an accident, like a traumatic brain injury or something like that.
Interesting.
Okay, so who gets this? Like, should I be scared? Was my first thought. People who have a history of mental illness, depression, schizophrenia, substance abuse, brain tumors, strokes, blood clots, brain injuries, and bipolar disorder in teens are the people that are more at risk, according to medicinenet.com, which is scary.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But again, not enough is known about it to like say, oh, this causes this and blah, blah, blah. Like they think, hold on, I'm going to go to my written notes here. I took too many notes.
Same. I was just jumping through my shit like, oh.
In Caitlin Doty's video, she was talking about how it might be linked to, in the brain, the amygdala and the fusiform gyrus, which affect facial recognition and emotional attachment. And also they did a PET scan of somebody who was experiencing Cotard syndrome, and it looks like the brain of a person in a vegetative state. So
that's so nuts that their brain would be like, because they're thinking and doing stuff, and like they're still fully alive people, right? Like they're
but they, like, Mademoiselle X just kind of wore herself away by starving herself. So, and they isolate, and so this can be a really tragic syndrome. And I'm sure the numbers that I have access to are not, I'm sure a lot of people experience this and don't seek help because they're like, why would I think this? Or, like, I can imagine there'd be a lot of judgment around that. But I wanted to point out, some patients do admit that their condition like defies logic. That was also part of the mortician's video. My favorite quote, she was quoting another person in this video. There was an artist who suffered from Cotard syndrome. She was talking about, I think you told me about this, so this is kind of where this all started. This lady's at a doctor's office, I believe, and there's a guy like kind of looking her up and down in the waiting room, and she says, quote, "You may think I'm hot, but I'm also a rotting corpse. Sucks to be you, sir."
Honestly, same.
And her name is Esme Wei-Jun Wang.
Yeah,
is more current.
Yeah, I had seen this video maybe a couple months ago when it came out because I'm a huge Caitlin Doty fan. And I knew our Caitlin had a, psychology background. And so I've kind of been begging her to do this one.
It's true.
To explain it to me, because I saw this video and I thought this artist was an extremely interesting person. And that quote also struck me. There's a lot of things you think when someone is like looking you up and down, depending on like what your confidence is and what your brain is like, sometimes I'll think, ew, like pig, or like, oh hi. But like to have your brain bring up, this guy thinks I'm hot, but he's really like checking out a corpse, like a dead rotting person.
It's just so matter of fact is the thing I like about it the most.
Sucks to suck, guy.
So the good news is it seems like Cotard syndrome is treatable. They've had some good luck with medication therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, or psychotherapy. Some people use antipsychotics, anti-anxieties, which, hey, love them.
Yeah.
Antidepressants, hey, love them.
Love them.
In extreme cases, which is also true for extreme cases of depression, electroconvulsive therapy can be used, ECT. I know that one has a pretty scary like history, but it turns out in really extreme cases of, well, more prevalently depression, it can actually really help people, and it's not dangerous if it's done by a like professional, obviously a medical professional, I believe. I'm like reaching back into my psychology classes. I think they give them some kind of muscle relaxant and probably some kind of sedative, so they really don't feel anything. But I know it's scary. You're making a face, but sometimes your brain needs a reset for really extreme, in like if nothing else has worked.
Oh no, I fully understand. Definitely, like where people are coming from. I definitely had a time, even this year, where I was going a little off the rails and needed a little bit of like, medicated help.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess I just cringe at the history behind it, of when it wasn't trained professionals and when they were just shocking the shit out of people.
Yeah, no, because it's really scary. So that's kind of the breakdown of Catards. And I also want to point out that there was an episode of Scrubs where this was mentioned.
Hey,
They talked about it, or Caitlin Doty talked about it in her video. So I'm going to talk about some case studies of Cotard syndrome, because that's really all that we've got access to is case studies. And really, really briefly, a case study is where you're looking at like one or two people. And when there's a true study in psychology, it needs to be double blind, which means the participants don't know what they're getting. The people administering the test don't know what other people are getting. There needs to be a control group. There's all kinds of shit that goes into making a study to make it have what's the most important thing, which is statistical significance, where you're like, oh yeah, this causes this. And I can prove it with math.
And I have thrown some math at it. Would you?
Yeah. So while case studies are really interesting and can provide insight, they're not statistically significant. So basically, grain of salt. One of the first ones is Mr. B. All of these have really like tongue-in-cheek names, I guess, because they're like obviously patient privacy.
Mr. B.
Yeah. He's a 65 retired teacher. He didn't really have any issues, no family history of mental illness. He smoked cigarettes for about 30 years. And then all of a sudden he had a quick onset of this illness that lasted about 1.5 years. So it started out with depression. Quote, as his symptoms progressed further, he developed delusions of catastrophe, nihilism, poverty, and persecution. Nihilistic delusion involved a description of everything coming to an end. He would verbalize that his organs are no longer working, his brain has stopped functioning, and his house has developed cracks and is going to fall down.
Oh, God, that's so horrible.
Isn't that
I'm
awful?
so sorry, Mr. B.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So he tried to kill himself, but was luckily saved.
Oh.
And eventually he tried to starve himself, but he was eventually treated with meds and ECT, and he came out of it.
Okay?
Yeah, he was okay.
Oh, thank goodness.
I know. Mrs. A. Oh, Mrs. A.
Hey, Mrs. A.
No. So she was 62. She was a homemaker. She had been a bipolar for 35 years. She had depressed mood, anxiety. This is a quote: depressed mood, anxiety, decreased socialization, loss of appetite and subsequent weight loss, decreased interest in household, poor self-care, ideas of worthlessness, pessimistic views of future, forgetfulness, and psychomotor retardation, end quote. And there was also some nihilistic delusions eventually. So in this one, she also thought that all of this had rendered her to be like in poverty, just like Mr. B. So I don't know how that kind of plays in, but it's at least in these two cases, again, not statistically significant, but there's like this little link of they think they're also in poverty, which I guess.
Are they not, though, in actuality?
I don't think so, because they had access to medical care and a house. They both say like, I don't want my house to fall down. I think my house is going to fall down. Quote, this is about Mrs. A. She would say that her house may collapse any day and the occupants will die. She also starts refusing food. And then she eventually, quote, developed mutism, refusal to eat, rigidity in all limbs, and fecal and urinary incontinence. So she went catatonic.
Jesus.
I know. But was eventually, again, she was treated with medication and ECT and was apparently fine.
God, the wonders of modern medicine.
I know. So in this study, both of the patients were over 60. And the study also said that it seemed to be more common in general in females and older people. It was more common in older people. Like it doesn't happen very often in younger people, adolescents, apparently. Another one here is Mrs. L. She's 53. She was admitted to a psychiatric unit. Her family called 911, quote, because the patient was complaining she was dead, smelled like rotting flesh, and wanted to be taken to a morgue so she could be with dead people. I know.
Oh, God.
I know. So she thought that the paramedics were trying to burn her house down when they got there. She reported depression, low energy, low appetite. She had been on antidepressants in the past. She lived in the Philippines for 18 years and then moved to the US about a month before this happened. So she had a history of antidepressant use, but she didn't know what kind. She actually just used medicine at lower doses than normal, I guess. And she did not need ECT to be treated.
Wow.
One thing that I thought was interesting in her case study was that her family was really involved in her care, it sounds like, in a good way. They visited her, they tried to get her to eat, and they were like very involved in her care, basically. And that seems to, I mean, she had a good outcome. She didn't need ECT and she just needed medication. So who knows? I just thought that was interesting. It's a nice thing that maybe her family's involvement helped. I just like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, my last case study here. This one was from Wikipedia. So again, grain of salt. This one is apparently an article called Betwixt Life and Death, Case Studies of the Cotard Delusion. It was written in 1996. It's about a Scotsman whose brain was damaged in a motorcycle accident. Oh my God. So he left the hospital in Edinburgh in 1990. His mom tried to take him to South Africa. Quote, he was convinced that he had been taken to hell, which was confirmed by the heat, and that he had died of sepsis, which had been a risk early in his recovery from the motorcycle accident, and that he had died of sepsis, or perhaps from AIDS, in parentheses, he had read a story in The Scotsman about someone with AIDS who died from sepsis, end parentheses, or from an overdose of a yellow fever injection. He thought he had borrowed his mother's spirit to show him around hell and that she was asleep in Scotland.
Wow.
End quote. That was a long one. I had a lot of quotes in there.
No, that, again, the power of the human brain.
Right? And this one's interesting too, because it's like in parentheses, they kept saying like, oh, he saw this earlier. So he was worried that he had died of sepsis, and sepsis was a real thing, like a real concern when he was in the hospital.
Yeah.
He thought he had died from AIDS, which he read a story about somebody that died from AIDS. So it's like he took bits of reality and put them into his reality.
Yeah, kind of like what I was talking about a little bit, where people can incorporate events from their life or events from the world in general into their delusions.
Yeah, exactly.
That's fascinating.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, poor
guy.
That's
Cotard syndrome. I know that's not a great way to end it, but I hope he was okay.
I hope he was too. It sounds like a lot of these people in the modern day are able to get help.
Hopefully, yeah, they're doing okay. And it sounds like it's one of those ones that just kind of comes and goes sometimes for people.
Yeah.
Which is scary.
Yeah.
So not one that I'm gonna, be afraid of, but now it's out there.
It's out there.
It's out there.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks for doing that. I know I've been pestering you to do that one, and it was everything I wanted it to be.
Okay, good.
Horrific, scary, sad, all that fun stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to do this episode because we cover a lot of true crime stuff. We cover a lot of archaeology stuff, but I wanted to do some out of the box bone topics.
Something else. Yeah, something a little different. And talking to Gus last week about phrenology, that kind of has some, what's the word? Like it's tied to psychology in some ways. It has some,
A
way that people were classifying parts of the brain, which ultimately is what psychology ended up doing, finding out what part of the brain does what.
Yeah.
And more. I've really dumbed it down there. There's more to it. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I tell you again, I'm an undergraduate in psychology years ago. So.
Oh, it was not so long ago. But
no, it wasn't. I do have a question for you.
Yeah, shoot.
What's your favorite bone?
My favorite bone?
Yeah, we haven't asked each other, have we?
Fuck, I don't think so. Well, I think I'd have to say I like the toe bones. I think they're cute.
Yeah.
Little toe bones.
Nice.
What about you? What's your favorite bone?
My favorite bone? I think it's gotta be the skull. I mean, I've said this before though. Don't laugh because I have said this before.
That's true.
Not on the record. I like the skull because it protects your brain and you need your brain to be protected. Scariest thing in the world to me is that infants have a big hole in their skull that's slowly closing as they grow a little bit at the beginning of their life. It's so scary. And I know that we're about to end this podcast and I just took a turn, but it really freaks me out.
I mean, I would be very afraid to poke the child head. I would not poke the child head.
No, not poke, but I have touched a baby's head and just been like, whoa.
What the fuck?
What the fuck? What are you thinking?
But Katelyn, did you know that there are 22 bones in the skull?
Now I do. I didn't. Oh my God. We have to go. We're losing it.
Yeah. If you enjoyed this episode of this podcast, feel free to give us a little 5-star rating on Apple Podcast or leave us a review. You can even just write down that there are 22 bones in the skull. I would love to see that in the Apple reviews. Or send us a message about the 22 bones of the skull at our website, anythingbones.squarespace/Squarespace.
Dude, our website is anythingbonespodcast.squarespace.com.
anythingbones.pizza.biz.
Goodbye, bon voyage.
Bon voyage, we love you.
Thanks for listening to Anything Bones. Follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Anything Bones Podcast, or email us at anythingbonespodcast@gmail.com.
Thank you to Nick Kruger for our spooky music and Stephen Vetteroff
At Chubby Scrubby on Twitter.
for our jazzy vocals, and thank you to Camilla Franklin
At Camilla Strader on Instagram.
for our beautiful bony artwork. Please rate, review, and subscribe. Do not buy Katelyn's life insurance.